The rifle felt heavier than it should have. Sarah Mitchell had held thousands of weapons in her 12 years as a military firearms instructor, but this one carried the weight of something she couldn't name. The Navy SEAL standing before her had just done something unprecedented in military training history. He'd handed over his position, his weapon, and his pride to a woman half his size. "Ma'am, the line is yours," he said, stepping back with a respect that echoed through the sudden silence of the shooting range. What happened next would shatter every assumption about gender, skill, and the unspoken hierarchies that governed military life. This wasn't just about swapping targets or trading places on a firing line. This was about the moment when excellence met opportunity, when years of quiet determination collided with unexpected recognition, and when a simple act of acknowledgement changed two lives forever. But to understand how a routine training exercise became a legendary story whispered through military bases across 3 continents, you need to know about the woman who never intended to make history, and the warrior who had the courage to step aside and let her make it. Sarah Mitchell's journey to that life-changing moment began in a place where most military legends are born, in the quiet determination of someone who refused to accept limitations. Growing up in rural Montana, she learned to shoot before she learned to drive, spending countless hours with her grandfather on their family ranch, where missing your target meant going hungry during hunting season. Her grandfather, William Hayes, was a World War II veteran who treated firearms with the reverence most people reserved for religious artifacts. Every morning before dawn, he would take young Sarah to the makeshift range he built behind their barn. The ritual was always the same: clean the rifle, check the ammunition, set the targets, and then practice until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. "Shooting isn't about the gun, little one," he would tell her as she struggled with weapons nearly as tall as herself. "It's about understanding yourself. The rifle only does what your mind and body tell it to do. Master yourself, and you'll master anything you point that barrel at." Those words would echo through Sarah's mind years later, but at 8 years old, they were just something her grandfather said while she focused on trying to hit tin cans at 50 yards. She never imagined that those early morning sessions were building the foundation for a military career that would challenge everything the armed forces thought they knew about marksmanship. By the time Sarah turned 16, she was outhooting men twice her age at local competitions. The trophy shelf in her bedroom groaned under the weight of first-place ribbons and medals from state-level shooting contests. But success in small-town Montana felt limiting to a young woman whose dreams stretched far beyond the ranch boundaries. The decision to join the military wasn't born from patriotic fever or family tradition. Sarah's father had been a conscientious objector during Vietnam, and her mother was a high school teacher who believed education, not warfare, was the path to changing the world. When Sarah announced her intention to enlist, the kitchen table conversation lasted until 3 a.m. and ended with tears, shouting, and her mother's reluctant blessing. "If you're going to do this," her mother finally said, exhausted from hours of arguing, "then you'd better be the best at whatever they ask you to do. Don't you dare let them treat you like you're less than anyone else in that uniform." Sarah enlisted on her 18th birthday, choosing the Army because their recruiter promised her opportunities in military police work and firearms training. What the recruiter didn't mention was that being a woman in military firearms instruction in 2003 meant fighting for respect every single day and every single interaction with every single person who assumed she'd gotten her position through quotas rather than qualifications. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was where Sarah first encountered the institutional skepticism that would shadow her entire military career. Her drill sergeants weren't openly hostile. The military had policies against that, but their doubt was written in every sideways glance, every unnecessarily repeated instruction, every time they positioned her at the back of the formation during weapons training. The first time she outshot her entire platoon during rifle qualification, her drill sergeant studied her target for a full minute before announcing her score. The range fell silent as everyone processed what they'd just witnessed. A 19-year-old woman from Montana had just achieved the highest marksmanship score in the company's recent history. "Mitchell," the drill sergeant called out, his voice carrying none of the usual gruff approval that accompanied exceptional performance. "You'll report to advanced marksmanship training next week." That moment should have felt like victory. But Sarah recognized the tone. It wasn't celebration, it was investigation. Her superiors weren't congratulating her. They were trying to figure out how to categorize an anomaly. Advanced marksmanship training introduced Sarah to weapons systems she'd only read about in magazines. Sniper rifles, automatic weapons, specialized equipment that required not just accuracy but deep technical knowledge about ballistics, wind compensation, and environmental factors that could turn a perfect shot into a dangerous miss. She excelled at everything they threw at her, but excellence came with a price. The better she became, the more isolated she felt from her peers. Male soldiers who might have become friends kept their distance, unsure how to relate to someone who consistently outperformed them in what they considered their domain. Female soldiers often resented her success, feeling that her achievements somehow diminished their own accomplishments in other military specialties. The loneliness of being exceptional in a field that didn't know what to do with you began to wear on Sarah's confidence. She started second-guessing herself, wondering if her success was real or if people were treating her differently because of her gender. The doubt became a constant companion during her first deployment to Afghanistan in 2005. Forward Operating Base Chapman was a dusty collection of military buildings and defensive positions that housed about 800 soldiers. Sarah's role was training Afghan National Army soldiers in weapons proficiency, a job that required not just teaching skills but earning trust from men who had never been instructed by a woman in their entire lives. The cultural challenges were immediate and severe. Afghan soldiers would refuse to make eye contact with her during instruction. Some would openly laugh when she demonstrated techniques they considered too advanced for their needs. Others simply walked away from training sessions, preferring to remain untrained rather than learn from someone they considered inappropriate. Sarah's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel David Park, was a career military man who believed in results over politics. He'd watched Sarah's performance during stateside training and decided to give her the support she needed to succeed, even if that meant challenging cultural norms that had existed for centuries.
Mitchell, he told her during their first week at Chapman,
I don't care if they respect you initially. I care that they leave your training sessions as better soldiers than when they arrived. Everything else is their problem, not yours. That philosophy sustained Sarah through months of frustration and small victories. Slowly, incrementally, she began earning respect from the Afghan soldiers she trained, not because they changed their minds about women in combat roles, but because her instruction was so superior to anything they'd previously experienced that they couldn't ignore the results. The breakthrough came during a joint training exercise with American and Afghan forces. A simulated attack on their position required precise long-range shooting to eliminate targets positioned at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. Sarah was observing the exercise when she noticed that both American and Afghan shooters were struggling with wind conditions that were causing their shots to drift left of their intended targets. Without being asked, she moved to one of the weapons positions and made a series of adjustments to the scope and shooting position. Her first shot eliminated a target that had frustrated 3 previous shooters. Her second shot took out a target at maximum range that everyone assumed was too difficult to engage effectively. The Afghan commander who had been most resistant to her training approached her after the exercise. Through an interpreter, he said something that would become a turning point in her deployment. You shoot like a ghost. We cannot see you miss. From that day forward, Sarah's training sessions were fully attended and actively participated in by soldiers who had previously dismissed her. Word of her exceptional abilities spread through the base, and then to other, forward operating bases in the region. Requests began arriving for Sarah to conduct specialized training for high-value missions that required precision shooting capabilities. Her reputation was building, but Sarah had no idea that her most significant challenge and greatest opportunity were still years away. She was focused on the daily work of making soldiers better at their jobs, not realizing that every shot she fired, every technique she perfected, and every student she trained was preparing her for a moment that would define not just her career, but how the military thought about excellence itself. The end of her first deployment brought Sarah back to Fort Bragg, where she was assigned to advanced instructor duties and specialized weapons training. Her personnel file was filled with commendations and recommendations for accelerated promotion, but Sarah was beginning to understand that exceptional performance could be as much of a burden as it was an achievement. She was different, and everyone knew it. The question that would define the next phase of her career was whether the military was ready for someone who broke their assumptions about who could be the best at what they considered the most fundamental military skill. The answer to that question would come during a routine training exercise with elite special operations forces, when a Navy SEAL would make a decision that shocked everyone present and changed everything Sarah thought she knew about recognition, respect, and the courage required to acknowledge excellence wherever it appeared. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2008. When Sarah was reviewing training schedules in her cramped office at Fort Bragg. Master Sergeant Rodriguez knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, carrying a folder marked with classifications she'd never seen on routine paperwork. Mitchell, you've been requested for specialized training assistance, Rodriguez said, dropping the folder on her desk with the kind of careful formality that meant someone important was paying attention. Joint Special Operations Command wants you to observe and assist with advanced marksmanship evaluation for SEAL Team 6 candidates. Sarah stared at the paperwork, trying to process what she was reading. SEAL Team 6, officially known as Naval Special Warfare Development Group, represented the absolute pinnacle of Special Operations Forces. These were the warriors who handled missions so classified that most people would never know they'd happened. The idea that they wanted her assistance seemed impossible. There must be some mistake, she said, looking up at Rodriguez. They have their own instructors. Why would they need me? Rodriguez shrugged, but his expression suggested he'd asked the same questions. Apparently, word of your capabilities has reached people who make decisions above our pay grades. You're to report to Dam Neck Naval Base in Virginia Beach next Monday. Don't screw this up, Mitchell. This kind of opportunity doesn't come along twice. The drive to Virginia Beach gave Sarah 5 hours to think about what she might be walking into. SEAL Team 6 had a reputation that bordered on mythology within military circles. These weren't just elite soldiers. They were the elite among the elite, chosen from the ranks of an already impossibly selective special operations community. Their marksmanship standards were legendary, their training regimens were classified, and their operational capabilities were discussed in whispers even among other special operations units. The fact that they wanted input from an Army instructor felt either like a tremendous compliment or elaborate setup for humiliation. Sarah had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed too good to be true, especially when they involved proving herself to men who had already proven themselves in ways she could only imagine. Dam Neck Naval Base was unlike any military installation Sarah had previously visited. Security was layered and intense, with multiple checkpoints and verification procedures that took nearly an hour to navigate. When she finally reached the designated training facility, she was escorted by a serious young sailor who spoke only when necessary and seemed uncomfortable with the entire situation. The shooting range where she was told to report was a technological marvel that made Fort Bragg's facilities look primitive by comparison. Computer-controlled target systems, environmental monitoring equipment, and ballistic measurement devices that could analyze every aspect of a shooter's performance with scientific precision. This wasn't just a place to practice shooting. It was a laboratory for perfecting the art of precision marksmanship. Commander James Sullivan was waiting for her in the range observation area, reviewing files and checking equipment with the methodical attention that characterized everything about special operations culture. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 30s, but carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from years of life-or-death decision-making. Sergeant Mitchell, he said, extending his hand with a firm grip that lasted exactly the appropriate length of time. Thank you for making the trip. I hope you're prepared for some interesting work. Sullivan explained that SEAL Team 6 was implementing new training protocols for long-range precision shooting, incorporating techniques and technologies that hadn't been tested in their specific operational environment. They wanted an outside expert to observe their current methods and provide recommendations for improvement. We're not looking for someone to teach us how to shoot, Sullivan clarified, his tone making it clear that such an assumption would be insulting. We're looking for someone with the technical expertise to help us optimize our existing capabilities. Your reputation for innovative instruction methods and exceptional personal performance suggested you might provide valuable insights. The qualification felt important. This wasn't about proving she was better than Navy SEALs, something that would have been presumptuous to the point of absurdity. This was about contributing specialized knowledge to help already exceptional operators become even more effective. Over the next 3 days, Sarah observed training sessions that redefined her understanding of what human beings could accomplish with firearms. The SEAL candidates she watched were performing at levels that exceeded anything she'd seen in conventional military training. Their accuracy was phenomenal, their speed was incredible, and their ability to perform under stress conditions that would break most people was genuinely awe-inspiring. But Sarah's trained eye also noticed inefficiencies and missed opportunities. Techniques that worked well for individual shooters weren't being adapted effectively for team-based scenarios. Environmental factors that could improve accuracy weren't being utilized consistently. Equipment adjustments that could enhance performance weren't being implemented because they conflicted with established procedures. Her job was to observe, analyze, and recommend improvements without overstepping boundaries that could undermine the respect these warriors had earned through years of proven performance. It was a delicate balance that required diplomatic skills Sarah hadn't known she possessed. The breakthrough came during a long-range shooting exercise designed to test precision under extreme conditions. Targets were positioned at distances from 800 to 1,200 yards, with environmental factors including wind, temperature variations, and lighting conditions that changed throughout the day. The exercise was designed to simulate the kind of challenging shots that might be required during actual operations. Sarah watched as shooter after shooter struggled with a particular target positioned at 1,000 yards, where shifting wind conditions and afternoon heat distortion were creating problems that frustrated even these elite operators. After 2 hours of attempts, with success rates far below the team's normal standards, Commander Sullivan approached her observation position. "Sergeant, you've been watching this exercise for the entire afternoon," he said, clearly frustrated with his team's performance.
"What do you see that we're missing?" Sarah had been dreading this moment, the point where observation shifted to demonstration, where she would have to either prove her expertise or reveal its limitations in front of people whose professional lives depended on their shooting capabilities. "Sir, the heat distortion is creating a false image of the target position," she explained, pointing toward the target range.
"Your shooters are compensating for the apparent target location rather than the actual target location. Additionally, the wind patterns at this range are different from what the flags indicate because of the terrain features between the shooting position and the target." Sullivan studied the range, then looked back at Sarah with an expression that revealed nothing about his thoughts. "Show me," he said simply. Walking to the shooting position felt like approaching a judge's bench. Every SEAL candidate on the range was watching, waiting to see if the Army instructor could back up her analysis with performance. Sarah checked the rifle, a precision weapon system that cost more than most people's cars, and began the mental calculations she'd performed thousands of times before. Wind speed and direction at the shooting position versus probable conditions downrange. Temperature effects on ballistic performance. The precise adjustment needed to compensate for heat distortion that was creating a false target image. Range to target confirmed by laser measurement. All the variables that separated exceptional shooting from merely good shooting. Her first shot hit the target center mass, exactly where she'd intended. The range fell silent, except for the distant sound of the target system confirming the hit. Her second shot, aimed at a different target under similar conditions, produced identical results. Sullivan walked to the spotting scope, verified her shots, then returned to the shooting position. "Sergeant, would you be willing to demonstrate the compensation techniques you're using? It appears our people could benefit from your methods." What happened next transformed Sarah's understanding of how excellence was recognized and respected within elite military communities. For the next 4 hours, she worked with individual SEAL candidates, explaining the technical aspects of her shooting methods and demonstrating techniques that improved their already impressive performance. These weren't men who accepted instruction easily or acknowledged superior performance quickly. They had earned their positions through years of training that eliminated anyone who couldn't excel under impossible conditions. But they were also professionals who understood that learning from someone with superior expertise, regardless of their background, was essential for maintaining their edge. The respect she earned that afternoon wasn't given because of her gender, or despite her gender. It was earned through demonstrated competence that helped them become better at their jobs. It was a pure meritocracy, where performance was the only currency that mattered. By the end of the week, Sarah had been invited to return for additional training sessions and had received a formal commendation for her contributions to special operations training protocols. More importantly, she had experienced what it felt like to be valued for her expertise without the complex gender dynamics that had characterized much of her military career. But the most significant outcome of her time at Dam Neck was a conversation with Commander Sullivan on her final day. He mentioned that several of his operators had requested additional training from her, including Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, a 15-year veteran who had been initially skeptical about outside instruction, but had quickly recognized the value of her methods. "Webb is one of our best," Sullivan explained. "He's also one of our most experienced instructors. If he thinks you have something valuable to offer, that carries significant weight with our community." Sarah had no way of knowing that Marcus Webb would become central to the most important moment of her military career, or that their next meeting would occur under circumstances that would test everything she'd learned about excellence, recognition, and the courage required to acknowledge superior performance when you encountered it. The drive back to Fort Bragg was different from her journey to Virginia Beach. Instead of anxiety about proving herself, Sarah felt a quiet confidence about her place in the military's evolving understanding of expertise and capability. She had worked with the best and been accepted as someone who could make the best even better. What she didn't realize was that her reputation within special operations communities was spreading in ways that would soon create opportunities and challenges beyond anything she'd previously experienced. Excellence, she was about to discover, was both a gift and a responsibility that could change not just your own life but the lives of everyone around you. 6 months after her return from Dam Neck, Sarah had settled into a routine that felt both comfortable and limiting. Her work at Fort Bragg had expanded to include specialized training for various special operations units, and her reputation within military firearms instruction circles had grown substantially. But success in military training felt increasingly distant from the kind of operational challenges that defined elite military service. The morning that changed everything started with a phone call that came through official channels but carried the informal urgency that characterized Special Operations communications.
Colonel Patricia Hayes, whom Sarah had never met, was calling from Joint Special Operations Command headquarters with a request that defied normal military protocol. Sergeant Mitchell, I'm organizing a joint training exercise involving multiple Special Operations units from different branches of service, Colonel Hayes explained, her voice carrying the crisp authority that came from years of command experience.
We need someone with your specific expertise to observe and evaluate marksmanship performance across units that have different training backgrounds and operational requirements. The exercise, scheduled for the following month at a classified training facility in North Carolina, would bring together operators from Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Air Force Pararescue, and Marine Force Reconnaissance. These were warriors who typically worked independently, each convinced their methods and capabilities were superior to those of other units.
The purpose, Hayes continued, is to identify best practices that can be shared across the Special Operations community. We need an evaluator who has worked with multiple units, understands different training methodologies, and has the technical expertise to make objective assessments.
Sarah understood that this was an unprecedented opportunity, but she also recognized the potential pitfalls. Asking someone to compare and evaluate the performance of different elite units was like asking a judge to referee a competition where everyone was already convinced they were the best.
The politics alone could destroy her career if handled incorrectly. Ma'am, I'm honored by the request, but I want to ensure I understand the scope correctly, Sarah responded carefully.
Are you asking me to rank unit performance? Or to identify techniques and methods that might benefit everyone? Hayes laughed, a sound that suggested she'd dealt with similar concerns before. Nothing more, nothing less. These operators are professionals who understand that learning from each other makes everyone more effective. Your job is to facilitate that learning process. The training facility where the exercise would take place was a sprawling complex of ranges, training areas, and support buildings located in the North Carolina wilderness.
Security was even more intense than Dam Neck had been, with multiple layers of clearance verification and access controls that reflected the sensitivity of bringing together so many elite operators in one location. Sarah arrived 2 days before the exercise began, giving her time to familiarize herself with the facilities and review the training protocols each unit would be demonstrating.
The complexity was staggering. Each unit had developed marksmanship techniques optimized for their specific operational requirements, resulting in methods that were dramatically different despite achieving similar results. Navy SEALs focused on precision shooting from unstable platforms, reflecting their maritime operational environment.
Army Special Forces emphasized rapid engagement of multiple targets in complex terrain. Air Force Pararescue trained for emergency situations where immediate accurate fire might be the difference between saving lives and losing them.
Marine Force Reconnaissance perfected techniques for long-range surveillance and elimination targets in hostile territory. Each approach was highly effective within its intended context, but Sarah quickly realized that cross-training opportunities were being missed.
Techniques that worked brilliantly for one unit could be adapted to enhance the capabilities of others, but institutional pride and operational security concerns had prevented the kind of knowledge sharing that could benefit everyone. The first day of the exercise was devoted to unit demonstrations, with each group showcasing their specialized techniques and capabilities. Sarah observed from designated areas, taking detailed notes and analyzing methods with the systematic approach she'd learned during her years as an instructor. The Navy SEAL demonstration was led by Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, the operator she'd worked with at Dam Neck 6 months earlier.
Webb had aged in that short time, not physically, but in the way that combat veterans carried experiences that changed how they moved through the world. His demonstration of maritime shooting techniques was flawless, showcasing capabilities that seemed to defy the limitations of physics.
When Webb noticed Sarah in the observation area, he approached during a break between demonstrations. "Sergeant Mitchell, good to see you again," he said with the same quiet professionalism she remembered.
"I've been using techniques you taught me during our last training session. They've proven extremely valuable in operational situations." The acknowledgement felt significant, but Sarah was careful not to let personal pride interfere with her evaluation responsibilities. Webb's unit was scheduled for additional demonstration time later in the exercise, and she needed to maintain objectivity when assessing their performance. The Army Special Forces demonstration revealed techniques that prioritized adaptability and rapid target acquisition in complex environments. Their approach was more aggressive than the precision-focused methods favored by other units,
but their effectiveness in simulated combat scenarios was undeniable. Air Force pararescue showcased shooting techniques optimized for emergency situations where accuracy had to be achieved quickly despite high stress levels and challenging conditions. Their methods reflected the reality that their operators might need to engage threats while simultaneously conducting life-saving medical procedures. Marine Force reconnaissance demonstrated long-range capabilities that exceeded anything Sarah had previously witnessed. Their patience, precision, and ability to maintain effectiveness over extended periods were genuinely impressive. By the end of the first day, Sarah had filled multiple notebooks with observations and identified numerous opportunities for cross-pollination of techniques. But she also realized that the real challenge wouldn't be technical, it would be diplomatic. Getting elite operators to acknowledge that other units had methods worth adopting required a level of professional humility that didn't come naturally to people who had succeeded by believing in their own superiority. The second day was scheduled for integrated exercises where operators from different units would work together on challenges that required multiple skill sets. This was where Sarah expected to see either breakthrough collaboration or competitive friction that could undermine the entire exercise. The morning session involved long-range shooting challenges that required precision under varying environmental conditions. Targets were positioned at distances from 600 to 1,400 yards, with wind conditions, lighting changes, and terrain features that would test even the most capable operators. Sarah watched as teams composed of operators from different units struggled to coordinate their approaches. The Navy SEALs wanted to use maritime-specific techniques that didn't translate well to terrestrial environments. The Army Special Forces preferred rapid engagement methods that sacrificed precision for speed. The Air Force pararescue operators were trained for emergency situations that didn't match the methodical requirements of long-range shooting. The Marines had the technical skills but weren't accustomed to working with operators trained in different methodologies. After 3 hours of frustration and mediocre performance, Colonel Hayes approached Sarah's observation position. "Sergeant, these are some of the most capable operators in the world, but they're performing below their individual capabilities when working together.
What do you recommend?"
This was the moment Sarah had been both anticipating and dreading. Her evaluation could either facilitate the kind of learning that would benefit all units, or it could create conflicts that might damage relationships between elite communities that needed to work together.
Ma'am, each unit has techniques that would benefit the others, but they're approaching this as a competition rather than a learning opportunity, Sarah explained. With your permission, I'd like to demonstrate integrated techniques that combine methods from all units. Hayes considered the request, understanding that asking an outside observer to demonstrate techniques to elite operators was either inspired leadership or potential disaster. Proceed, Sergeant. Show them what integrated excellence looks like. Walking to the shooting position felt like stepping onto a stage where the audience consisted of the most demanding critics imaginable. Every operator present had earned their position through years of training that eliminated anyone who couldn't perform at the highest levels. They were watching not just to evaluate her techniques, but to determine whether an outsider could teach them anything worth learning. Sarah selected a rifle and began the mental preparation that preceded any significant shot. But instead of using techniques from a single training background, she deliberately incorporated methods she'd observed from all 4 units. Maritime stability techniques from the SEALs, rapid target acquisition from Army Special Forces, stress management from Air Force pararescue, and precision calculations from Marine Force reconnaissance. Her first shot eliminated a target at 1,200 yards that had frustrated multiple previous attempts. Her second shot, at a different target under different conditions, achieved identical results. Her third shot demonstrated wind compensation techniques that combined methods from different units to achieve accuracy that exceeded what any single approach could accomplish. The range fell silent as every operator present processed what they'd witnessed. This wasn't just exceptional shooting. It was a demonstration that their individual capabilities could be enhanced by learning from each other, rather than competing against each other. Marcus Webb was the first to approach the shooting position. "Sergeant, would you walk us through the integrated techniques you just demonstrated? I think everyone here could benefit from understanding your methods." What happened next transformed the entire exercise from competitive demonstration into collaborative learning. For the remainder of the day, operators from all units worked together, sharing techniques and learning methods that enhanced their already impressive capabilities. But the most significant moment was yet to come. During the final exercise the following day, Marcus Webb would make a decision that shocked everyone present and created a moment that would be remembered throughout the special operations community for years to come. Sarah had no way of knowing that her demonstration of integrated techniques had set the stage for an act of professional recognition that would challenge everything the military thought it knew about hierarchy, respect, and the courage required to acknowledge excellence when you encountered it, regardless of who possessed it. The final day of the joint exercise dawned with the kind of clarity that made everything seem possible. The early morning mist was burning off the North Carolina ranges, revealing target arrays that would challenge even the most capable operators present. Sarah had spent the previous evening reviewing her notes and preparing recommendations that she hoped would facilitate continued collaboration between units that had historically guarded their methods with fierce secrecy. Colonel Hayes had scheduled the morning for individual unit performances on standardized challenges, allowing Sarah to make direct comparisons between different approaches to similar problems.
The afternoon would feature a concluding exercise designed to demonstrate the integrated techniques that had emerged from 2 days of collaborative learning. The morning sessions proceeded with the precision that characterized everything about special operations culture. Each unit performed with the excellence Sarah had come to expect, but she also noticed subtle incorporations of techniques they'd learned from other units during the previous days. The Navy SEALs were using Army rapid engagement methods in appropriate situations. The Marines were adapting Air Force stress management techniques for long-duration shooting. The integration was happening organically, driven by professionals who recognized value regardless of its source.
But it was during the Army Special Forces demonstration that Sarah noticed something that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, despite being a Navy SEAL, was observing the Army session with unusual intensity.
He was studying their techniques with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was seeing solutions to problems he'd been wrestling with for some time. During a break between demonstrations, Webb approached Sarah's observation position.
His expression carried the weight of someone making a significant decision. "Sergeant Mitchell, I need to ask you something that might sound unusual," he said, his voice carrying the careful formality that preceded important conversations in military culture.
This afternoon's concluding exercise, I think it would be more valuable if you demonstrated the integrated techniques rather than just observing our attempts to implement them. Sarah was confused by the suggestion. Her role was explicitly evaluative, not participatory. Having an outside observer take an active role in special operations demonstrations would violate protocols that existed for important reasons.
"Staff Sergeant, I appreciate the suggestion, but my role here is observation and recommendation," she replied carefully. "I'm not qualified to participate in special operations training exercises." Webb's response surprised her.
"Ma'am, with respect, I think you're more qualified than anyone else present to demonstrate what we've been learning about integrated marksmanship techniques. You've worked with all our units. You understand our different methods. And yesterday you showed us capabilities that exceeded what any of us have achieved individually." The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Hayes, who had been monitoring the exercise from her command position and had overheard enough to understand what was being discussed.
"Sergeant Mitchell, Staff Sergeant Webb, what exactly are you proposing for this afternoon's session?"
Hayes asked, her tone suggesting she was willing to consider modifications to the scheduled program if they would enhance the exercise's educational value.
Webb straightened to attention before responding. "Ma'am, I believe Sergeant Mitchell should demonstrate the integrated shooting techniques during this afternoon's concluding exercise. She has superior technical knowledge and has proven capable of performance that would benefit everyone present." Hayes turned to Sarah, her expression revealing nothing about her thoughts. "Sergeant, what's your assessment of this suggestion?" The request put Sarah in an impossible position. Accepting would mean taking an active role in an exercise designed for elite operators, potentially appearing presumptuous and undermining the respect she'd worked years to earn. Declining would mean missing an opportunity to demonstrate techniques that could genuinely enhance the capabilities of some of the most important warriors in the American military. "Ma'am, if you believe it would serve the exercise's educational objectives, I'm willing to participate," Sarah finally responded. "But I want to ensure that my participation enhances rather than detracts from what these operators have accomplished." Hayes considered the request, understanding that non-standard decisions could either enhance training effectiveness or create problems that would echo through the special operations community for years. "Very well," she decided. "This afternoon's exercise will feature integrated demonstrations by all participants, including Sergeant Mitchell. The objective remains educational rather than competitive." The afternoon session was scheduled for the range's most challenging course, featuring targets at distances from 300 to 1,500 yards, with environmental conditions that included variable wind, changing light, and terrain features that would test every aspect of marksmanship skill. The course was designed to simulate operational conditions where missing could mean mission failure or loss of life. As participants prepared for the exercise, Sarah noticed a change in the atmosphere that she couldn't quite identify. The casual conversations that had characterized previous days
had been replaced by a focused intensity that suggested something significant was about to happen. Marcus Webb was checking his equipment with unusual care, adjusting and readjusting gear that was already perfectly configured. Other operators were watching him with expressions that suggested they were anticipating something beyond a routine demonstration. The exercise began with operators taking positions at designated firing points, each assigned specific targets that would test their capabilities under challenging conditions. Sarah was positioned at the end of the line, with targets that represented the most difficult shots on the course. The first round of shooting proceeded normally, with each operator engaging their assigned targets with the precision that characterized elite military marksmanship. Sarah's performance was consistent with what observers had come to expect. Exceptional accuracy achieved through methods that integrated techniques from multiple training backgrounds. It was during the second round that Marcus Webb did something that shocked everyone present and would be talked about in special operations circles for years afterward. Webb had just completed a series of shots that demonstrated the integrated techniques he'd learned during the exercise. His performance was flawless, representing the kind of adaptation and improvement that the exercise had been designed to encourage. But instead of moving to his next assigned position, he did something unprecedented. He approached Sarah's firing position, carrying his rifle with the same ceremony that characterized military honor guard procedures. Every operator on the range stopped what they were doing to watch what was happening. "Sergeant Mitchell," Webb said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence of the range. "I've been a special operations marksman for 15 years. I've worked with the best instructors and operators in the military. In my professional judgment, you represent a level of technical expertise and shooting capability that exceeds anything I've encountered in my career."
Webb paused, understanding that his next words would create a moment that everyone present would remember for the rest of their lives. "Ma'am, I believe this range, this exercise, and everyone present would be better served if you took my position for the remainder of this demonstration." He continued, extending his rifle toward her with both hands. "You have earned the right to lead this line." The range fell into absolute silence.
In 15 years of special operations culture, no one present had ever witnessed anything remotely comparable to what was happening. A highly decorated Navy SEAL with extensive combat experience was voluntarily yielding his position to someone outside his unit, publicly acknowledging superior capability in front of the most elite warriors in the American military.
Sarah stared at the rifle being offered to her, understanding that accepting or declining would both carry consequences that would define not just this moment, but how the special operations community thought about excellence, recognition, and the courage required to acknowledge superior performance when you encountered it. Colonel Hayes was watching from her observation position, her expression revealing that she was witnessing something beyond the scope of normal military training.
Other operators had stopped their activities entirely, understanding that they were present for a moment that would become legend within their community. The weight of the decision was enormous. Accepting Webb's rifle would mean taking responsibility for leading an exercise among warriors who had earned their positions through years of proven performance in life-and-death situations. Declining would mean rejecting an acknowledgement that had required extraordinary professional courage to offer.
Sarah looked at Marcus Webb, seeing in his expression the kind of certainty that characterized decisions made by someone who had spent years making choices that other people's lives depended on. "Staff Sergeant Webb," she finally said, taking the rifle with the same ceremony with which it was offered, "I accept this responsibility and I will honor the trust you've placed in me." As Sarah moved to the lead position on the firing line, she realized that everything in her military career had been preparing her for this moment. Not just the technical skills and training, but the understanding that excellence was a responsibility that required courage to both achieve and acknowledge. What happened next would complete a transformation that had begun years earlier on a ranch in Montana, and would conclude with a demonstration of marksmanship that would redefine how the special operations community thought about capability, regardless of where it was found. The rifle in her hands felt different now, not heavier but more significant. She was holding not just a weapon, but the trust of warriors who had earned the right to be respected by everyone who wore an American uniform. The targets ahead represented not just challenges to be overcome, but opportunities to prove worthy of the confidence that had been placed in her. As she prepared for the shots that would conclude the exercise, Sarah understood that this moment would be remembered not because of her individual performance, but because of Marcus Webb's courage to acknowledge excellence wherever he found it, and because of what it meant for everyone who had witnessed a Navy SEAL voluntarily yield his position to someone who had earned it through pure merit. The next few minutes would determine whether Webb's faith had been justified, and whether a moment of unprecedented recognition would become a story of triumph or a cautionary tale about the dangers of challenging established hierarchies in military culture. The rifle felt familiar in Sarah's hands, but the weight of expectation made everything different. As she moved to the lead position on the firing line, she was acutely aware that every operator present was watching not just her technique but how she handled the unprecedented responsibility that Marcus Webb had placed on her shoulders. The targets ahead represented the most challenging shots on the course, distances that tested the limits of both equipment and human capability, under environmental conditions that would challenge even the most experienced operators. These were the shots that separated good marksmen from exceptional ones, routine performance from the kind of excellence that became legend. Sarah began her mental preparation with the systematic approach that had served her throughout her career. Wind conditions across the range were complex, with different speeds and directions at various distances due to terrain features that created microclimates. Temperature variations were affecting ballistic performance in ways that required constant mental calculation. Light conditions were changing as afternoon shadows moved across the range. But this time, instead of relying solely on techniques from her own training background, Sarah deliberately integrated methods she'd learned from every unit present during the exercise. The stability techniques that Navy SEALs used for shooting from unstable platforms, the rapid environmental assessment methods favored by Army Special Forces, the stress management approaches that allowed Air Force pararescue operators to perform under extreme pressure, the patience and precision calculations that made Marine Force reconnaissance so effective at long-range engagements. Her first shot was aimed at a target positioned at 1,300 yards under challenging wind conditions. The integration of techniques that had previously been used separately created a shooting solution that was more comprehensive than any single approach could provide. The shot was perfect, center mass impact that demonstrated not just technical skill, but the value of collaborative learning that transcended institutional boundaries. The second target, at 1,500 yards, under even more challenging conditions, required everything she had learned about precision shooting. This was beyond the range where most operators would attempt engagement, in conditions that made accurate shooting extraordinarily difficult. But Sarah's integrated approach allowed her to achieve results that exceeded what any single training methodology could accomplish. The impact was confirmed by range equipment that measured not just accuracy but the technical aspects of ballistic performance. The data revealed shooting that represented the highest level of performance anyone present had ever witnessed. But it was her third shot that created the moment everyone would remember for the rest of their careers. A target had been positioned at maximum range under conditions that multiple previous shooters had declared impossible to engage effectively. The distance, combined with environmental factors and equipment limitations, represented a challenge that was beyond normal operational requirements. It was the kind of shot that separated world-class performers from merely excellent ones. Sarah studied the target through her scope, calculating variables that included not just distance and wind, but atmospheric pressure, humidity, temperature gradients, and minute terrain features that could affect ballistic performance. The mental mathematics required were extraordinarily complex, but years of training had made the calculations intuitive. The shot required holding far off the apparent target position to compensate for environmental factors that were pushing projectiles in multiple directions simultaneously. It was the kind of shooting that required absolute confidence in technical knowledge and complete trust in equipment and training. When she fired, the range fell into complete silence as everyone waited for impact confirmation. The delay seemed endless as the projectile traveled the extraordinary distance to its target. When the impact was finally confirmed as a center mass hit, the silence continued for several seconds as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Marcus Webb was the first to speak, his voice carrying across the range with the kind of authority that came from 15 years of special operations experience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you have just witnessed shooting that represents the highest level of marksmanship capability I have encountered in my entire career. Sergeant Mitchell has demonstrated that excellence transcends unit boundaries, training backgrounds, and every other factor except competence and dedication." The applause that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military service. It wasn't polite acknowledgement or routine appreciation for good performance. It was the kind of recognition that warriors reserve for achievements that earn genuine respect. Colonel Hayes approached the firing line, her expression revealing that she understood the significance of what had just occurred. "Sergeant Mitchell, what you've accomplished today extends far beyond exceptional marksmanship," she said. "You've demonstrated the value of integrated training approaches and collaborative learning that could benefit our entire special operations community." But it was Webb's final gesture that completed the transformation of a routine training exercise into a moment that would influence military culture for years to come. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "I want you to keep this rifle. It has served me well through multiple deployments and countless training exercises, but it has never been used to achieve the level of performance you've demonstrated today. I believe it belongs with someone who can utilize its full potential. The offer was stunning in its implications. Special Operations warriors developed personal relationships with their equipment that bordered on the spiritual. Weapons were carefully selected, precisely configured, and maintained with religious attention to detail.
For Webb to offer his personal rifle to someone outside his unit represented a level of professional recognition that transcended normal military protocols. Sarah accepted the rifle with the understanding that she was receiving not just a weapon, but a symbol of respect that had been earned through pure merit.
The weight of the honor was more significant than any formal military decoration she had ever received. The conclusion of the exercise marked the beginning of changes that would ripple through military training protocols for years afterward. Reports from the joint exercise led to policy modifications that encouraged cross-training between units, sharing of best practices that had previously been guarded secrets, and recognition that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources. Sarah's career trajectory changed dramatically following the exercise. She was promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to develop integrated training protocols for Special Operations forces across all military branches. Her methods became part of standard instruction for elite units, and her approach to collaborative learning was adopted throughout the Special Operations community. But the personal impact of that day extended beyond professional advancement. The moment when Marcus Webb had yielded his position had demonstrated something profound about leadership, recognition, and the courage required to acknowledge superior performance when you encountered it. Years later, Sarah would look back on that afternoon as the moment when her understanding of military service fundamentally changed. It wasn't about proving herself superior to others. It was about contributing to collective excellence that made everyone more capable.
Webb's decision to step aside had required a level of professional courage that was as impressive as any combat action. In a culture that valued individual achievement and unit pride, acknowledging that someone from outside your community possessed superior capabilities required genuine humility and wisdom. The story of that day became legend within special operations circles, told and retold in training facilities around the world. But it was never presented as a story about a woman succeeding in a male-dominated field, or about an outsider proving herself to elite warriors.
It was told as a story about excellence being recognized and honored regardless of its source, and about the professional courage required to yield position to someone who had earned it through pure merit. Sarah continued her military career with the understanding that her greatest achievement hadn't been demonstrating superior marksmanship skills.
It had been facilitating a moment of recognition that expanded how the military thought about excellence, capability, and the importance of acknowledging superior performance wherever it was found. Marcus Webb went on to complete multiple deployments where the integrated techniques he'd learned during the exercise proved invaluable in operational situations.
He never expressed regret about his decision to yield his position, understanding that his recognition of Sarah's capabilities had contributed to improvements that benefited the entire special operations community. The rifle that Webb had given to Sarah became a teaching tool that she used in advanced marksmanship instruction for the remainder of her career. Every time she fired it, she was reminded that excellence was not about individual achievement, but about contributing to collective capabilities that made everyone more effective. The joint exercise had been designed to identify best practices that could be shared across special operations units. It succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, not because of formal training protocols or institutional changes, but because one warrior had possessed the courage to acknowledge excellence when he encountered it, and the wisdom to understand that recognition was more important than pride. The moment when Marcus Webb handed Sarah his rifle and yielded his position on the firing line became a defining example of leadership that transcended rank, unit identity, and personal ego. It demonstrated that true military excellence was measured not by individual achievement, but by the courage to recognize and support superior performance that would benefit the entire community. That afternoon in North Carolina had proven that the highest form of professional honor was not receiving recognition for your own achievements, but having the wisdom and courage to ensure that excellence was acknowledged and utilized wherever it was found, regardless of who possessed it. For Sarah, the experience had transformed her understanding of what it meant to serve. For Marcus Webb, it had demonstrated that true leadership sometimes required stepping aside to allow others to excel. For everyone who witnessed that moment, it had proven that excellence knew no boundaries except those imposed by limited thinking and insufficient courage. The legacy of that day continued to influence military training and culture long after the participants had moved on to other assignments and challenges. It remained a reminder that the highest form of military service was not individual achievement, but contributing to collective excellence that made everyone more capable of accomplishing their mission and protecting the people they had sworn to serve.